Afternoon, everyone. My name is Jane Slacksmith and I'm a property investor. And the editor of Money magazine, Effie Zahus, approached me a couple of months ago and said, Jane, you've been educating property investors over the last 7 years about how they can make money out of property. How about you try and help out homeowners as well? So I had to have a bit of a think about this because I really have been concentrating on helping property investors learn how to invest in property. So I really had to have a bit of a change of thinking. So I looked at what I had done with my property investments, and in actual fact, my very first property that I bought here in Melbourne back in 2001 was my first home. However, I used the criteria of property investors to buy that property. Now I've done a lot of renovations since then, and I have 8 investment properties today. And of those renovations that I've done, well, I've done 7 of them, you can see some before photos here and some after photos. Hopefully you can tell the difference. As you can see, I've actually done quite a few renovations and I've done them strategically. And when I was thinking about how homeowners can actually apply, I guess, the tips of savvy property investors to what they're doing when they're buying a home or when they're renovating, I started looking about what I had actually done. Now, the very first property that I bought here in Melbourne, I bought for $425,000 in 2001. In 6 months, I did a renovation that cost me $50,000 and I added $275,000 worth of value. So at the end of 6 months, that $425,000 property went to a $700,000 property. And there was a lot of research involved in that. So what I want to take you through today is, I guess, some of the tips of successful investors. And I know that we read about investing all the time and property investing, but there's not that many successful property investors out there. In actual fact, there's 1.6 million property investors in Australia. 2%, 440,000, actually own more than one investment property. And there's only 14,000 of us who own more than 6 properties. So there's not that many out there. So what I've done is I've gone through all the information that I've gathered over the last 10 years. I have over 130 books that I've read on property investing. In actual fact, I've got a book myself coming out this year. But in addition to that, I've actually written over $150 million worth of home loans in helping other people buy properties throughout Australia. So I've actually got a large base of people that I could look at and who've been successful in investing when I look at how homeowners can use some skills to increase their net worth. Because I have this belief that everyone should have the right to live the life that they desire without pesky money worries. And I know that property investing can get you there. So I had a look at what I knew about homeowners. In actual fact, most Australians keep all of their net worth in their own home. Some have money in investment properties and some have money in superannuation. But most of us actually have most of our net worth in the home. So it kind of makes sense that we start our home working for us. Because really, what we do is we go to work, we come home, we spend a lot of time in our careers, but we don't see our home anything other than like a sanctuary or a place that we live. But in actual fact, it's your largest asset that you can have working for you. This is what we know about homeowners. 60% of people only move up to 9 kilometres from their previous address, and we move every 7 years as Australians. On average, most Australians move every 7 years. So if you think about where you lived last, or how long ago it has been since you moved, or when you were kids, how often you moved, we don't actually stay in a house forever. It's not like we buy a house and expect to come back there with the grandkids. So we need to think strategically when we do buy properties, and that's what I want to show you today. This is just a small example of if you actually choose one suburb over another suburb, one suburb that's going up in value by 5% per annum, and the other suburb going up in value by 10% per annum, there's quite a significant difference. Just have a look at this graph. That's actually a $400,000 difference over 10 years if you choose to buy in one suburb over the other. So it only actually takes you a little bit of research to find out. So we know that 60% of people live and move within 9 kilometres of their last address. So that means when you're looking at a place to buy for your next home, you're probably only looking at 3 to 4 suburbs. So if you had the research to be able to understand which suburb was going to outperform the other, you could actually add this $400,000 to your net worth. So I want to give you some tools that you can take away today so that when you're looking at your next property or your next home purchase, you can apply those. And also I'm going to give you some renovation tips that you can apply to your existing properties. You might be a lot like me. When I was working 40 hours a week, I realised there was a great Australian crime going on. Pretty much we work 40 hours a week for 40 years, so we can retire on 40% of our end income. And that's just when we've got all this extra time when we want to go out there and play. So I wanted to actually have a retirement income that was actually going to give me the freedom of choice to do what I wanted when I wanted. And I believe we all have the right to do that. And that's why I started investing. Now, I went to university and I studied mining engineering, and I spent 15 years in the mining industry, and in the last 10 years of that, I spent as an explosives expert. Now, it was those skills that I learnt as an explosive expert in actually assessing risk that I applied to my property investing strategies, and that's how I turned my $45,000 of savings in 2001 to a $7 million property portfolio today. So it's that low risk property investing strategies that I want to talk to you about having a plan B and plan C and not losing a nest egg. So for me, I started by going to free seminars like this one, and also I read over 130 books on property investing. But the thing I learnt was that everyone had a different message, and I just didn't know what to do. So I started with my own research, and I started with the skills I had, and my skills were actually assessing risk. So I looked at every property as a risky thing, and I looked at how I could minimise the risk. But first I looked at the people who had been successful, and those people had set their goals. So that's why I think the number one tip that you can take from successful investors today and apply to yourself as a homeowner is set yourself a goal. Now, it may not be a financial goal, which is, I want a $50,000 passive income. It may just be, like my goal is to have a dream home and a comfortable existence for my family. But I really urge you to first of all get out and set yourself some goals. If you do that, it's like having your personal GPS. Once you've set your goal, it's then about finding the different routes or paths to get to that goal and doing something about it. Now, I honestly believe that property investing is the way to do that. And when I talk about property investing, I'm talking about investing in your own home as well, because I believe that's an asset that you can have working for you. So having your personal GPS working for you by setting your goals and knowing what you want to do is one of the most important things that you can do, and one of the important tips that you can steal from successful investors. The second tip that I have is actually understanding how you're going to actually make that money. And it's through capital growth, and investors get this. So you saw that graph I put up previously, the difference between the suburbs of 5% per annum and 10% per annum. That showed us a difference in 10 years of a $400,000 net worth for a homeowner. Capital growth is something that's really important that you need to understand. Imagine everyone here at some stage has actually bought or sold a property, and most of us have actually sold a property that is worth more when you sold it than when you bought it. In actual fact, there's only 3.7% of Australians that actually have a home loan that's higher than their property price. So that actually a lot of Australians have a lot of equity. So we look at this data here, 42% of Australians actually have a home that is worth double what they bought it. And there's over 30% of Australians that actually own their home outright. So there's a lot of people out there with a lot of equity in their home, and that's your net worth. And that's because of capital growth. So that's how capital growth will work for you. Now, investors use capital growth to actually increase their net worth. And if you choose the right home, you can do that too. You saw this example before. If we projected that over 15 years, if you chose the right suburb to buy in, i.e. the one going up 10% per annum compared to the suburb going up with 5% per annum, you can have $1 million difference in your net worth. So that's why using these research tools I'm going to show you today is so important when you're actually looking at buying your next home. It's not just, though, looking at the right suburb. We all know there's certain streets in the right suburb that can actually assist you, and actually you can do better in. And there is a free tool that the Australian Bureau of Statistics from Census Night provides us with that shows us what streets we should be buying in as an owner-occupied. Now, I've just downloaded this from Yarraville. If you have a look at this graph, you can see that the really dark red areas, That's where on census night, most of the people were sitting in a home that they owned. That's where the owner-occupiers are. Are there any investors out there, property investors in the crowd? So if you look at the light yellow areas, that's where the renters want to live, and that's usually next to the transport hubs. So you can actually download this free information from the census that tells you the streets where the owner-occupiers live. Now, owner-occupiers usually keep their streetscape a bit better. They have, their area looking better. They keep their home in a better condition, and often it's those streets that go up in value higher. So we're talking about not just buying in the right suburb, but being actually able to access the right streets as well. But everyone's after the hotspots, so we now know capital growth is important, but how do you find those areas that have extra potential? Well, there's one common way that most investors use, but there's also something that's quite unique to the Melbourne situation that I want to share with you at the moment. The first is the trickle effect. When my husband and I were looking for an investment property in the eastern suburbs of Sydney in 2006, we looked at the trickle effect. Now, we knew that Coogee, Randwick and Kensington all had median prices over $1 million, but Kingsford had a median price of $680,000. So that meant when people couldn't afford to buy Coogee, Kensington and Randwick, they were going to start looking at the next suburb out, and that was Kingsford. And of course, the median price now is well over $1 million. I've just pulled this out for Melbourne. This slide shows you essentially that most of the trickle effect work starts at the CBD. That's where people need to live and work. So that's where most people want to live. Now, as they can't afford that, they move to the next suburbs. Now, in the 80s, we had expansion out to the east, so you can see that there's some dark blue areas going out to the east. And in the 90s, we had expansion down the southeast freeway, so you can see that there's expansion, that trickle effect, as prices go up in suburbs down the southeast. What's interesting, though, is to the north and to the west, there hasn't really been that trickle effect, or yet, which takes me to looking at different suburbs and the effects that capital growth will have on them. Now, I've chosen 5 western suburbs here, and if you look at those suburbs, I've got the information from Residex, and they can show us in the next 5 years, they pretty much are all on par. Everyone is expecting to deliver 9% return. However, in the next 8 years, some of them outperform others. So for instance, if you actually bought in Kensington over Footscray, in Kensington, if you bought your property now at that median price, and based on that capital growth, you'd be expecting an extra $500,000 in value of your home. However, if you bought in Footscray, you'd only have $300,000. So there's a $200,000 differential there. Now, of course, if you look at Footscray and Kensington now, you might say, well, there's a difference in price to start with. But look at Seddon. There's only a $500 difference now between the median prices of Seddon and Kensington. But if you bought in Seddon, based on these predictions, in 8 years' time, you'd be $80,000 worse off if you'd bought in Seddon over Kensington. So just having this little bit of information gives you the ability to say, out of the 3 to 4 suburbs where I want to buy my next home, if I buy with one that's got a 1% per annum difference in capital growth, I can add so much more in value to your home and your net worth. So once you have your goals and you understand what you want to do, then you can actually work out how you're going to get there. And capital growth is one of those things. Now, I mentioned we're in a unique situation at the moment. Now, KPMG demographer Bernard Salt has done up some numbers on where the population movements have been in the last 30 years in Melbourne and where they're going to be. There's going to be 143,000 people move out to the west, around that Werribee area. And I'm not suggesting everyone moves out to Werribee, although I hear it's a nice place. But what I'm saying is, understand the effect of this. I think we're actually going to get to this perfect storm. So if you look at the situation here, we're going to have that trickle effect where people who can't afford the city move to the next suburb. But we've got the people in the west who over a period of time get better jobs, become aspirational, and they want to start moving into town. So we're going to have a pricing pressure from the west as well. So you're actually going to have these middle suburbs in that western middle ring that are actually going to go up in value because population is what drives growth. People want to live there. And that's what you're looking for as an investor. And as a homeowner, I challenge you also to consider that when you're assessing the suburbs that you're going to buy your next home in. Okay, so let's move on to the next tip. Now, I just wanted to add in, I guess, something on finance because of all the $150 million worth of properties that I've facilitated sale of in Australia, whenever I talk to investors, they are really positive about their loans. They see it as a leveraging tool that it can actually get them to a higher net worth. But when I speak to homeowners, they see it as something negative, it's a drag, it's something they have to pay off, and it's something that really worries them. So I want you to think a little bit differently. Most homes are a principal and interest repayment. However, nowadays you can actually have your home on an interest-only repayment as well. Now, I'm not suggesting you all rush out and do that, because principal and interest is a really good strategy, a forced saving strategy. However, remember the statistics that we saw. Of all the people who are in Australia, most of us move every 7 years. However, with our home loans that are paid off principal and interest, it's not to year 20 on a 30-year loan that you're actually paying more each month in principal than interest. So for those first 20 years, you're actually paying more interest off than principal. And if you move every 7 years, that extra little amount that you're paying each week, fortnight or month for those 7 years could actually be used elsewhere. So maybe you have high credit card debts at 20%. You could pay that off quickly by having interest-only loan for just a few years, so until you get that out of the way. Or like what most investors do, they see their home also as a leveraging tool. So what they do is they look at the equity in their home and they pull that out and they buy a property. Now, one of the myths about property buying or property investing is you have to pay your home off first. And the truth is, you don't need to do that, because if we spend all our time and effort in paying our home off, in actual fact, by the time you get to pay it off, you probably can't afford to buy where you wanted to buy. So what investors do is they use equity in their home to buy an investment property. Now, this graph shows if you bought one property, where you'd be in 15 years, you have your $500,000 property based on a 5% per annum capital growth, so I'm being conservative, would be worth $989,000. But if you had two properties worth $500,000 working at 5% per annum for you, you'd be $1 million better off. And that's one of the biggest myths about property investing. You need to pay off your home first. The second myth about property investing is that you have to sell a property to get equity. Now remember, I bought my first property in 2001. I bought it for $425,000. I only had $45,000 to start with. What I did then is I took that $425,000, I added a $50,000 renovation, and in 6 months that property was worth $700,000. I then took $100,000 out of that as a new loan and bought another property. I did a renovation and I took money out of that and bought another property. And because I was actually adding value through the renovations, I turned my $45,000 into a $7 million property portfolio today that has a huge amount of equity in it. And that's what's possible by thinking a little bit differently. Now, as a homeowner, we just learned that a lot of homeowners have a lot of equity in their homes. So I urge you to consider maybe doing things a bit differently. And if you're interested in looking at the finance structure around your home, speak to a specialist and make sure that you get it done correctly, because often a lot of people that I talk to end up with cross-collateralized loans, which restricts them in what they can do. So don't rush out and get an interest-only loan on your home loan, but understand that it's an option for you. Now, I just want to discuss the X factor, and this is something that investors get and they're watching. And I want to give you, I guess, some considerations that you should look for. It's what turns a kind of slow-performing suburb into a star. And it's kind of weird stuff, and they're intangible. And that's why when you read the papers, think about what the effect these things could have on a potential suburb or area. For instance, there could be things like federal or state incentives. Now, we know the First Home Buyers Grant actually drove up prices in an area. Has anyone heard of the My Schools website that actually does performance for schools? We've seen an incredible amount of property prices going up in value based on people actually buying in an area where the school is an outperformer compared to other high schools in the area, and that house or that area is actually in the catchment. So there's little things that you might read about in the paper that I just want you to consider and how they might affect the house or the property or the suburb that you're going to buy. And then there's something like local incentives. So, for instance, there's an area in southern New Zealand that had a really slow economy, and they got together with a local university and they agreed to waive all university fees. So all of a sudden they had this influx of students, which meant there was a huge demand for rental properties, so the rents went up, so the investors came, the investors started buying, so the property prices went up. So by just reading something in the paper that says, university is actually waiving their fees, and it might be in an area that you're actually looking at moving to, understand what the effect that could have on the price for your home in the future. And then there's another effect, which is industry and infrastructure. Little things like there was a huge population difference in Mount Barker in South Australia between the 2001 and 2006 census. And that's because they put in an access infrastructure and freeway so people can actually commute between Mount Barker to the city. So they could live in the tree change, but actually work in the city still. And hence people moved out there and property prices went up. So just look at the little differences. The West Link that's going to go in the next couple of years, there's going to be big changes. We know what happened with the Southeast Freeway. So watch for infrastructure announcements as well. Which brings me on to my last tip, which is the renovations. Now, as I said, I've got 8 investment properties and I've renovated 7 times, and it's making money through renovations where I think is where the major opportunities are. Now, you have to think strategically. And this is one of the things that I think that you can take as homeowners and apply to your home now or a future property you're going to buy that could really add to your net worth. Because after all, your home is your biggest asset, so you should start making it work for you. So here's some of the tips that I have for renovations that I've done. I think that you need to start thinking strategically. And don't get me wrong, I think renovation is really difficult. And I think, walking around here, there's some great ideas and great opportunities to talk to people that can help you. But you actually need to understand that a lot of investors get renovations wrong as well. They overcapitalise, or they actually renovate to their unique or own taste. Now here's something that you should know about renovating. When you're thinking about renovating, don't just think of your immediate needs. Think of your needs in the next 7 years, or how long you're going to stay in your property for, but also your needs for when you sell, because you're going to have to sell that property to someone in a few years' time. Now, one of the things that you may not realise, if you actually create a unique property, i.e. that sewing room with the complete sewing room fit out, or the media room, if it is only fitted out for that purpose and it can't be undone easily, future purchasers can't see the opportunities to do that. So they're going to see it as too unique. And if you convert that 3-bedroom house to a 5-bedroom house, and it's the only 5-bedroom house in the suburb, lenders won't lend to your potential purchaser because they need 3 comparable sales. So if you've got a 5-bedroom house and the bank sends a valuer out and the valuer comes back and says there's no other 5-bedroom houses we can compare against, this is a unique property, the bank is going to have a lot of issues in actually lending money to the person who's going to buy off you. So when you're renovating, renovate strategically. Plan and obviously budget. 90% of all budget blowouts of renovations is because you haven't planned properly, and it's the variances that are going to kill you. So be aware of that. And also, no matter if you actually have a project manager, architect or builder managing the renovation for you, be on top of it. Make sure you monitor it. They're going to move on and you're going to be stuck with that wrong design in the kitchen or the fittings that you don't like. So be aware that you need to be ever present and monitor your renovation. And finally, add more value than you spend. So remember, I spent $50,000 and my property went up by $275,000. So understand, if you think strategically about your renovation, you can do that too. Which kind of leads me to my Trident strategy. Now remember, I was an explosives engineer, so everything that I do is about low risk. I don't want just a plan A, I want a plan B and a plan C. So I developed this strategy for how we build our property portfolio and how we bought our house. Now remember that house I told you about in 2001, the dream home that I bought and renovated? We couldn't afford to live there then. 10 years later we moved back there this year. So, I understand delayed gratification, I understand the dream home, but I also sometimes understand that you have to put things off a bit. And that's what we did. We used this strategy to buy this property and every subsequent property. So, capital growth, buy in an area that's going to go up in value, buy below the market, and then renovate to add equity. So you've actually got 3 ways you're making money: the short term, medium term, and in the long term. And if you can do that, I really think, or just one of those, I really think that you're actually being in a better way of actually adding net worth to yourself by using your home strategically. So, it's all about getting to your goals faster, and I hope, these 6 tips that I've given you today is basically how you can do that. Most people have really a hope strategy when they go and buy a property. They hope it's going to work, and the reality is most people get it wrong. By having these 3 strategies working for you, you've actually got 3 chances, and so if you do get one wrong, like you do overspend on the renovation, then you've got the other 2 to fall back on that's going to make you money. Because, you know, these 6 strategies, I really think if you use just one of these and go out and do something today, and, you know, I really urge you to start with your goals. That's how investors think. They start with what they want at the end and then find the path, that personal GPS we talked about of getting there. Just start with your goals. Go away today, go away tonight. Write down what you want to achieve, because your home is an asset that can start working for you. And if you actually make it work for you through a strategic renovation now, or buying a property with a bit of these research tips in mind when you buy your next property, you really could add hundreds of thousands of dollars to your net worth. So, you know, I think that we've all got a gold mine that we're sitting on in our homes. And as I said, I was a mining engineer, and I can really suggest that if you take some of these strategies, that you will really be able to add to your net worth. Thank you.
Give a round of applause going for Jane, guys. That was great.